Hello, insiders, and welcome to episode number 7 of the Inside Job with Philip Cox podcast. And we are at episode 7, and that is very, very cool. That means we've done 6. If you do your math, which I did before I hit record, I did the math, and that means we've done 6 episodes. And that is wild because it wasn't that long ago that, actually, the last couple of years, I have thought, man, I think it would be kind of cool to do a podcast. Because if for no other reason, we just need more white male voices talking about theology and spirituality. Just kidding. We don't need that. But that's actually a terrible joke. But it's a joke because it's so ironic that I am recording this now. Anyway, for the last couple of years, I thought I think I'd like to do a podcast. And one of the reasons I didn't do it for so long is because I thought the last thing we need is one more white guy talking about God. That's actually probably not what we need. But I had this just thought that just doesn't go away. It just keeps nagging and needling at me. And then I thought, well, I don't even know where to start. And looking at a blank microphone and a blank page felt like, even if I had notes, it felt like I don't exactly know what to say. And I kept getting stuck and doubting and self-doubt and all those wonderful, wonderful feelings of imposter syndrome and all the things. And so for the last couple of years, I've hemmed and hawed about this very thing. And so when I started putting out these posts, the writing on Substack, it has just been a really easy transition into sitting in front of a microphone because I don't have to come up with anything because it's already on paper, and that's excellent and easy. So we have got 6 under our belt, and that is really amazing and something for me. It's amazing to me. 6 is nothing in the world of podcasting, obviously, but for me, it is significant. And that's worth noting. Today, episode 7, we're going to call it Take That, Potatohood. And that is a weird word, and it's going to come up later, and you'll see what it's all about. But Take That, Potatohood. It's not even a word. I just made it up. So, an introduction to spiritual practice. Take That, Potatohood. And here we go. Spiritual formation and the spiritual disciplines, or practices as they're sometimes called, though ancient ideas, are getting a good bit of airtime these days, and it's for good reason. For a long while, it seemed that growing churches gained a lot of priority over growing in Christ-likeness. You hear the difference between those two things? There's growing churches making my church bigger and bigger and bigger. And then there's growing in Christ likenesses, which is me and the church at large becoming more and more and more like Christ. And the two things are not the same. You can have very big churches that don't very much look like Christ. And so I write, so for a long while it seemed that growing churches gained priority over growing in Christ likeness. And the fruit of that shift is self-evident. And there I'm just pointing to every headline that you can imagine over the last couple of decades that show that just because you have, think of a tree, just because a tree has got a huge, broad, wide canopy, if it doesn't have also double the amount of roots underneath the ground that aren't seen, that tree becomes top heavy, except a palm tree. I think that's not quite the same for a palm tree, but just go with the metaphor that the analogy that for a tree to grow expansively, it also has to go significantly into the ground, into the work that nobody sees, that sits under the ground in the dirt. And that's not, the growing of roots is not fun work. To change to tie the metaphor into the analogy into our spiritual life. Digging into the dirt and growing our roots down. So the roots represent character. The canopy of the leaves, the foliage of a tree. Of course, that's beautiful. That's what everybody sees, how big it is, how bright it is, how beautiful, how colorful, how tall it is, how much it stands out. That's all above ground. And that's fun. That's Instagrammable, right? But what sits beneath the ground, the dirty work, the difficult work of digging into the soil, that's character building. That's virtue. That's growing into Christ-likeness, where our character is being developed. And that takes a bit of breaking the soil of ourselves to get that. So, and so I'm talking about every headline that says, another scandal, another church scandal, another church leader, another church, and, and for every one of those, there are, of course, tons and tons that aren't that. But this focus on growing churches to make, how do we get our church as big as possible, as fast as possible? We've gotten a lot of top-heavy churches and a lot of, let's call it top-heavy Christianity, and not a lot of deep-rootedness of people and of spirit in our spiritual growth and spiritual life. So I say the fruit of that shift is self-evident. So for those previously baptized in these ancient streams, these streams of spiritual formation and spiritual disciplines I'm talking about, those baptized in these ancient streams, this fresh immersion is an encouraging sign. For those previously baptized in these ancient streams, this fresh immersion is an encouraging sign, and it is an encouraging sign that maybe we're getting back to the stuff that actually helps align us with God's kingdom. Of course, as with any new trend I write, no matter how good it is, the risk exists of getting wrapped up in the whats and the hows, but losing track of the why. Why do we want to become like Christ? Why do we want Him to form our spirit? Why do we practice the disciplines? We don't want to just know how and what they are and how to practice them, but why are we doing this? So for this reason, a few months ago, I began working on a small devotional style guide introducing some of these classic spiritual disciplines / exercises / practices. They can get called all three of those things and a few other things. I started developing this guide for our church's Connect groups. So I thought from time to time I'd bring an excerpt from this project to my Substack subscribers, and that's what we're doing here. And I welcome your thoughts and your feedback, as the project is still in the revision and editing stage, I say. And it is, and it still is. And so if this tickles your fancy, or if you hear this and you go, oh, I don't quite understand, or I really don't think that that's true, or whatever, you're welcome to write me. As always, phil@theinsidejob.com.au. So I welcome your thoughts and feedback, as the project is still in the revision and editing stage. Below, which is what I'm about to read, below is the introduction to the devotional guide, which offers the heart of the why for the project and the practices as a whole. And then I have a break, and I start the actual intro here. That's an intro to this intro. And I start this intro with the passage from John, the Gospel of John, which is the fourth gospel of the four gospels in the New Testament. And it is the 15th chapter of that book. And it says, starting in verse 7, if you abide, this is Jesus speaking, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit and so prove to be my disciples or students. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. What an invitation from Jesus. And did you notice his metaphor? It's a really good one. He uses the imagery of a garden And that shouldn't be any surprise to us because garden imagery, or more accurately, Eden imagery, is used throughout the scriptures. In the passage, Jesus speaks of our life as his followers as being like a securely rooted vine, which represents God's kingdom, that easily and naturally produces fruit, which represents our growth into Christ-likeness. And this is the heart of what we call spiritual formation. Spiritual formation is the process by which we are shaped into the image and likeness of Christ for the sake of others. And I have a footnote there because this specific word for word is a definition that's given of spiritual formation by New Testament scholar and author Robert Mulholland in his book Invitation to a Journey. He says spiritual formation is the process by which we are shaped into the image and likeness of Christ for the sake of others. The imagery from Jesus stands as a reminder that everything we need for true life is found by staying connected to him. However, this thought brings up some really important questions, especially for those of us who might be willing to courageously admit that we don't always live out the fullness of joy that's spoken about in this passage. So, was Jesus mistaken? Did he misspeak? Or is it possible that the missing link is on our end? The passage above suggests that it's because we are not abiding or remaining in him. So, what are the things that keep pulling us away from this abiding connection, and how might we address these issues so that we can live out the abundant life found only in him? Well, I'm really glad you asked, and this little booklet is meant to help us rediscover some of the tested and proven ways of living connected to the vine, or God and his kingdom. These ways are known by various names. They're called by Eugene Peterson. He calls them the rhythms of grace. People like Dallas Willard and Richard Foster and Robert Mulholland and Ruth Haley Barton and lots of other people call them the disciplines of the spiritual life, or spiritual disciplines. Also spiritual exercises, which was kind of termed by St. Ignatius of Loyola, who was a 16th century Spanish priest, or as we'll refer to them here, we'll just call them spiritual practices. So what are these spiritual practices? Well, I give this hopefully helpful analogy, which is, so imagine finding out that a friend of yours is organizing a half marathon for a cause that you both really, really care about. The event, it's 6 months away, and you really want to participate. The only problem is that you've never run further than from the couch to the pantry during a TV ad break. So, what do? Are you sidelined by your couch potatohood, unable to support your friend? No, of course not. Thankfully, not at all. As it turns out, we happen to know that there are targeted, strategic exercise which you can immediately engage in your daily life that will help you to get ready for that race. Not only are there exercises, there are also qualified people and experienced friends who can assist you in that training process. So take that, Potatohood. You don't have any place here. Now, I realize, and I have this great picture, because right as I was writing this take that Potatohood line, which I just thought was hilarious, made me laugh, I looked up and I saw sitting above my desk where I write often, my desk at work, I have a picture from the amazing graffiti artist Banksy. I have a picture of his with a guy named, he's called this Rage the Flower Thrower. And this is a guy who clearly should be throwing a Molotov cocktail, a bomb into a crowd, but instead he's throwing a bouquet of flowers. And he put this at the Gaza Strip when there was a time of unbelievable, well, still is, but this was back in the early 2000s. And he put it there, and he as a marker to say, we're not putting more violence. What the world needs isn't more violence and hatred and war. We need to be throwing bombs, not of fire and of gas, but bombs of love and beauty and goodness into the world. So, Rage the Flower Thrower by Banksy sits above my desk. And as I wrote, Take That, Potatohood, I could just see this need and this desire for spiritual growth. What we need is to throw some things that are otherwise not really expected. And we're going to deal with these things in a way that's not really expected, just like Rage the Flower Thrower is doing the unexpected by throwing beauty instead of chaos, which I thought was pretty good. And I've got a picture of that in my Substack, so take a look at that. Now, I realize that this running a marathon might seem like a strange example, but the reality is that this same principle applies in our spiritual growth. How? Well, if you know that you want to live, say, with abiding in God's presence and walking in the fruit of the Spirit, which is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, but you find yourself instead struggling with jealousy, pride, busyness, anger, lust, greed, offense, fear, or any countless other number of issues that keep pulling us away from God's life-giving vine, then there are specific practices that target these areas of our life so that we can strengthen our spiritual muscles, just like there are targeted areas that can get us ready for the race. So these are practices like solitude, fasting, hospitality, simplicity, rest, prayer, meditation, study, and many, many others that serve as the means by which we overcome the traps and the things that hold us back from experiencing the joy that comes from abiding in God. Now, it's always important to say that these practices do not place you any more firmly in God's family, in God's love. They don't make you more, quote unquote, saved to you, if you want to use that language. That work is done by Jesus and Jesus alone. God's character is love. You cannot be outside of his love. These things do not make God more proud of you or any of that stuff. But however, the degree to which we are laying aside our ways of life and the things that are trapping us, the things that are getting us stuck, the degree to which we can get rid of those and become like Jesus in our being, our thinking, our doing, those have a lot to do with the ways that we arrange the details of our lives. Also, it's worth saying that this project isn't simply about giving more information. We have plenty of information. We've said this before. It's not hard to see that information alone is not really bringing us the kind of formation. Information doesn't bring the kind of formation that we actually need to live wisely in the world. Genuine change doesn't come from simply knowing more things. The ability to rattle off data or win an argument about what quad exercise is the best for long-distance running doesn't really get you any closer to actually being able to run the marathon. It's important, but it's not sufficient. At some point, that data, that information has got to hit the dusty streets if real transformation is going to occur. Now, while it's true that the Holy Spirit is the one who does the transforming work, that is true. The Holy Spirit is the one who transforms us. We are still given the choice to either resist or cooperate with that work. And so engaging the practices, disciplines, exercises, engaging those is about finding ways that we can learn to partner with rather than push against the rhythms of grace that the Spirit is already orchestrating in our lives. So, over the next few weeks, we are going to dive into a handful of these classic spiritual practices. And in each, I'm going to offer a couple of tips for practicing and a handful full of questions for both individual and group reflection. And until then, peace and joy.